So a lot of people ask me, are there alternatives to using straw? And technically there are. The only thing you really want to make sure is that you have a strong tensile strength for whatever straw alternative material that you use, because the straw is like the natural rebar inside the cob that holds it all together as one monolithic piece. So you want to make sure that whatever material you use has a strong tensile strength and is going to hold your building together. Typically you would use a rye straw, which has a strong tensile strength, and they tend to be longer cuts, which is good for holding the walls together. The longer the piece, the better in most cases. Not too long, but about a foot, maybe a foot and a half even. Wheat straw is another good type of straw to use, but it tends to be cut shorter and much smaller pieces, which is not quite as good, but it still works pretty well. It's a good quality straw and good tensile strength. So, in looking for an alternative, the tensile strength is pretty critical. The length, also look for the length. You want to have somewhat long pieces, strands. Some thoughts that I've had. I think you could technically use hay if you just had no other alternative. You had no access to straw at all. You could try using hay, but I just don't recommend it as a first choice because it does have the organic matter still in it. It's a pre-harvest material, whereas the straw is a post-harvest material, which is basically just a dead shaft left over, which doesn't break down nearly as easily. But if that's all you have, I'd say give it a try. Maybe do some testing first before you build a whole structure using hay. But give it a try, see how it reacts, see how if it decomposes quickly, if it sprouts out of your walls. That's pretty bound to happen in most cases using hay, but the sprouts will happen and they'll fall off eventually. So that's not really ruling it out. But some other alternatives down in Georgia, where I grew up, there's a lot of pine straw, and pine straw might be, it might work for cob as well. I've never tried it before. The strands are not very long. The tensile strength is not as good as straw, but it is a fiber material. It could be used. So look in your local area, whatever you have access to. That's one part of natural building. One of the principles is using what's locally available. So do some research, what you have locally available, and do testing. I really recommend you test whatever fiber alternative material that you use, because there's not a lot known about alternatives. But if you have access to the straws, especially the rye straw or the wheat straw, I definitely recommend using those fibers in your cob. So next I want to talk a little bit more about how to mechanize your cob mixing process. So we've gone over a lot of how to mix cob with the tractor, and that's a really, really good method. I'm a firm believer in the tractor method. There's other machines that you can use as well. I just want to bring those up in this video too. So a little more downscale to the tractor is the mortar mixer. So the mortar mixer is a pretty good way to mix cob. More quick and efficient than by foot. Of course, you have to have the machine and the power to run it, but you're not using as much of your own physical labor. So what you do with the mortar mixer is you put the soil and the aggregate into the mixer, you mix that up in the mixer, with the water, and then you have to dump it. So you dump it on to a tarp, and then you add the straw in by foot. So that's one of the downsides to the mortar mixer, because you can't put the straw into the actual mixer because it'll clog up the paddles and stop your production. So you mix the soil, aggregate, water in the machine, dump it on the tarp, and then stomp the straw in like you normally would with the tarp method. So mortar mixer is a good option. Cement mixer is not quite as good because the paddles inside the mixer are different from the mortar mixer. The mortar mixer paddles tend to mix your materials more thoroughly, and the cement mixer just kind of tumbles it more and doesn't get a good mix like the mortar mixer. So I would stick to the mortar mixer over a cement mixer. So another mechanized alternative, so it's kind of, you start the mortar mixer level, then you want to go up, produce more cob. I would go with either the tractor, or an alternative to the tractor is a bobcat. Bobcat is usually, depends of course, but usually a little smaller, smaller bucket size on the front, but the bobcat is much more maneuverable and usually quicker to drive around than a large tractor, which can be good because you have to be moving around the pile of material, and that agility with the bobcat is pretty good. So either a tractor or a bobcat are great for that front loading bucket method that we've gone over in previous videos, where you basically are pushing and squashing and smearing the material together to create that cob with the bucket. So you've got mortar mixer, tractor, bobcat, and then even a step up from that is to get a backhoe. And there are small backhoes, but I'm really talking about larger backhoes here, but the small ones will work as well. They just won't produce as large quantities at a time. So if you have a backhoe, what you can do is dig a pit. Doesn't have to be a particular depth. It's really going to depend on the size and length of your arm with the bucket on the end of the backhoe to be able to reach into that hole. So you have a hole, and you put your materials, your soil, aggregate, and straw and water, everything into this hole, this pit, and then basically what you're doing is just stirring it with the arm on the backhoe. So you have the long arm and the bucket on the end, and you're just kind of stirring it and churning it inside this pit. And so the advantage of this is you don't have to be moving the whole machine around your material like you do with the tractor or the bobcat. You're sitting stationary and you're just basically stirring. And then when you're done, you scoop it out and you put it wherever you want it to go. So the backhoe is really probably the most efficient and effective way to mix cob mechanized. And you can, depending on the size of the backhoe, create very large amounts of cob, good, thoroughly mixed cob in efficient amounts of time.